And as promised, of course, we've got Week in Perspective. We take a look at the top stories from the week and break it down for you even further. And of course, that is with my guests in studio. To my immediate right is Wahoro Ndoho, the former Director General for Debt at the Treasury. And away from me is Ken Gishinga, CEO of Mentoria and an economist. Now, before we get right into the discussion, gentlemen, of course, I want to know, how's your Friday going and how was the week so far, Wahoro?
Oh, pretty good. Taking it easy. Clearly, Kenyans are not doing too well out there, so we've had to rub shoulders with and see that we're trying to do the best we can, but yeah, pretty good.
Absolutely, Ken.
Well, maybe I should say Happy International Women's Day.
Early on.
Early on. As Wahoro said, the economy is not doing very well. Just talking to people on the ground tells you that we need to add more liquidity to this economy. Because
Okay. Now, Kenya could lose 0.6% of its tariff revenues once the Africa Continental Free Trade Area becomes operational on the 1st of July this year. Already 29 countries on the continent, including Kenya, have ratified the agreement that seeks to create the single largest trade bloc in the world.
Intra-regional trade is currently quite a small share of the total, so you're only sacrificing a small part of your tariff revenue. But in any case, tariff revenues now are much less important than they were 20, 30 years ago as a source of revenue. So for the Kenyan case, we find that it's about 0.6% of total government revenues. And we believe, firstly, that it would probably be quite easy to find other sources to compensate for that loss. And secondly, it's a price worth paying for the added dynamism and access to the continental market.
The 97% is basically the tariff lines. So you have 3% of the tariff lines that are not going to be opened up now. The important thing is to make sure that the 3% that is not going to be opened up does not constitute more than 10% of the trade that a country trades within the continent. So what we want to ensure is that you observe what we call double qualification. Double qualification means you not only open up your market by reducing the tariffs, but you also make sure that those tariffs that will remain are not going to be tariffs that mean that more than 10% of your intra-African trade with the rest of the continent is actually not going to be impacted.
But what the evidence shows is reducing tariffs on goods won't have a huge effect. What will have a big effect will be making sure that our borders work properly, making sure that you can trade seamlessly and quickly, what we call trade facilitation. That's going to make a big difference.
All right, well, there you go. Those are the details surrounding that particular story. Now, we want to get into the discussion with that piece of information. So we do know that, about a year ago, there was this conference in Rwanda. We had those 44 African nations present. Now we know 29 have ratified the agreement. I know Nigeria was the one that was dilly-dallying quite a bit. And now we're looking at that 0.6% when we talk about the reduction. So how significant is that? And Wahoro, we'll start with you.
To some extent, I don't think it's as significant as it's made out to be. There are larger questions with the free trade area. The biggest benefit of free trade is the fact that capital can move freely. And then that hardest part of a free trade area tends to be the factor called labor. And so in creating a free trade area for Africa, the one question I don't hear answered much is what happens to the factor mobility, especially in terms of labor. Once capital moves, then it means you allow for people to export profits. And everything I hear about the tariff, in fact, in terms of that tariff revenue, means that only a very small part, like in Kenya, what we call the formal economy, will actually benefit from that. If it can expand our businesses because you're free to trade with others, then the ability for the country to allow that free movement, and therefore the government can gain from revenue, then its taxation can grow. Okay. These revenues can grow. But as it stands now, I don't think it's as significant as they make it.
Ken, there has been this notice on the fact that logistics of the trade facilitation are what really needs to be focused on. What do you say to that?
Well, it's true you have to look at the logistics, but there are also non-tariff barriers that are huge. Things of culture, things of language, for example. And I think that's the reason for Kenya Yes, we pay attention to the Continental Agreement, but if you look at Kenya's largest trade partners, it's the Chinas, the US, the UK, and that's why even if the US bilateral trade deal, you saw Kenya putting almost more attention to it than across Africa, because we don't have that much synergies between countries. So yes, you can fix on the logistics, but for me, I think the longer term thinking is how can we make it possible that somebody in Nairobi can move to Senegal visa-free, doesn't require a work permit, and be able to open an industry to do business there. I think we're still a long way for that, and I think we tend to preclude those kind of assumptions.
So, yes, go on.
In fact, one of the things that I worry about is that it's all very well to do an Africa trade deal. East Africa is having problems. Forget even going broad there.
The region itself.
The region itself is having issues. And these non-tariff barriers tend to be a much bigger thing than even the tariff barriers. In fact, for East Africa, even tariff barriers are put. Like, for example, I know recently there's been this issue with Tanzania, and the fact that Kenyan businesses in Tanzania are finding that the government is imposing other charges on top to lift the prices of Kenyan goods, to make them uncompetitive in Tanzania. So there's a question of first perfecting this free trade area in our region first. Because if you can't do it there, makes me doubt whether we can really be effective in a broader Africa one. I think multinationals will be very happy, but I'm not so sure we are ready for that.
All right. Well, let's move forward to our next story, and that's coming back to the retail space. Now, hundreds of creditors who owed money to the tune of 3.2 billion shillings by struggling retailer Uchumi Supermarket are relieved this week. The creditors, together with board members of Uchumi, did vote to have all creditors paid under a debt restructuring plan, which marks a new turn to the debt-ridden retailer, which is, of course, tinkering on a shutdown. Although Uchumi's CEO Mohammed is confident that the once famous brand will bounce back, it does remain an arduous task for the house brand, which faces stiff competition when we talk about foreign brands that have entered the market, such as, and that includes Carrefour and the likes. Well, KTN's Abby Agina now reports.
Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Is a popular Kenyan song. Lyrics of the song rented the air at Bomas of Kenya as hundreds of creditors convened for what was to be a crucial meeting, a meeting to determine the fate of Uchumi supermarkets. From this meeting, creditors backed a plan to give up 30% of the debts owed under a plan dubbed Company Voluntary Agreement, which signals a path to recovery for the supermarket.
The other 30% is to be paid over a period, agreed of around 5 to 6 years, depending on the business how it goes. And the other 40% first we park it aside for now, which is going to be in some form of convertible preference shares.
The CVA, it gives the right to run the company in the hands of the creditors.
Uchumi, which is currently running 5 stores with a staff headcount of 200 employees, is banking on selling an 8-acre piece of land in Kasarani to meet the accrued debts it owes suppliers. The sale of the land, valued at about 3 billion shillings, is tipped to tilt the scale and save the public company from future liquidation.
The disposal of that asset is not sufficient to clear all the debt that we have.
Suppliers are optimistic that the CVA plan promises a speedy turnaround, which they hope will be fast-tracked to ensure all debts are paid before suppliers can resume supplying goods to the stores.
They are talking of a period between 5 to 6 years. But I think that is better than just them liquidating, paying other people, the secured creditors, that is the banks, and the suppliers just to go home empty-handed.
For now, Mohammed admits the retailer faces an uncertain future, but notes that tapping new strategies around e-commerce, franchising its stores, as well as setting up convenience stores could just be the magic bullet. Abi Agina, KTN Business.
All right, there you go. Well, that is the current situation with regards to Uchumi Supermarket. And Ken, I'll begin with you this time around. You know, what is the likelihood that this is going to be something that really bolsters their comeback with this restructuring plan that they have in mind?
It won't be easy, not least because the economy is not doing very well. Aggregate demand and purchasing power are quite low. So yes, there's something patriotic about it. Uchumi is an iconic brand, but I think we have to look at what will be the strategy. I know they've talked of e-commerce. What will be the competitive advantage? You know, we lost Jack Welch this week, and one of the things in his book, Good to Great, was really about what's the differentiating factor. Is it cost? Is it going to be on, what will it be? And for me, it hasn't come out very clearly. And if that doesn't come out clearly to consumers, and right now there are so many players in the market, it's going to be very hard for me to see why people will want to choose it beyond the sentimental value that it has.
So it's got the competition factor. It's got also, you know, like some other giants like Nakumatt that folded, and we already saw that there were so many factors surrounding that. And Uchumi has been struggling for a long time. Wahoro, do you think this longevity, this dragging out, is really something that is going to come to an end anytime soon?
No, I think my concern with Uchumi, I think it's part of the theme of, we've had several discussions on this, of government being in business. I think beyond clearing its debt and paying off suppliers, the reality is the market today is very different from Uchumi's heyday. So even if it was to be revived, it would be a very different animal from before. And the advantage it had of national appeal has also diminished. We could actually argue Nakumatt actually occupied that space very effectively as a private company. So my concern is that beyond basically restructuring and paying off the suppliers, I don't see the benefit of holding on to something that's had its use by in my view.
Okay. And, you know, even as we discuss that, let's take a look at this final story that I have, and that is in terms of the growth in technology, which has revolutionized our corporate environment, but at the same time, it's created more avenues for economic crimes. So Noah Kipkemboi has the details on that.
This set of support, incentives, and the right infrastructure will make the business to be more viable. And we are
cases of economic crime and fraud are on decline both globally and locally. In Kenya, over the past 24 months, cases of economic crimes have dropped from 75% to 58%.
These organizations certainly appear to have invested in robust governance, processes, systems, and tools that have enabled them to detect economic crimes as and when it happens.
Bribery and corruption, procurement fraud, asset misappropriation, and customer fraud topped economic crimes within the country.
At least a third of them reported having been asked to pay a bribe or believed to have lost an opportunity on account of bribes having been paid to the institution that was presenting the opportunity.
The estimated losses from economic crime stand at 5.5 billion shillings, with more firms experiencing losses, with majority of these cases being driven from internal and third-party players.
It is the people within the organizations, the people with knowledge of systems, the people with the opportunities that are actually orchestrating economic crime in organizations.
That the threat of crimes being originated through third parties is increasing. And that's giving organizations sleepless nights.
Technology is poised as a solution towards tackling financial crimes, but cases of fraud through the same technology is on the rise, calling on organizations and businesses to be up to date on fraud tackling technology. Noah Kipkemboi, KTN Business, Nairobi.
Thank you for that report, Noah. In talking about economic crimes, you know, we do see that over the last couple of years, Kenya lost about 5.5 billion shillings due to economic crimes. And even if this report says that we've seen this drop from 75 to 58%, it's still at a very high level. And I'd like to pick your brain about that. Wahoro, what do you say?
Yeah, even that looks high. I'm quite curious to see the question around, you know, focus has been very much on the private sector, and not the public sector. The public sector, not the private sector. The fact that it's actually a concern and the kind of money is being lost in the private sector says the opportunity cost of that is another angle to that. I'd be very interested to see. I mean, for every shilling that we are losing through this, how much other benefit are we losing in terms of, if the money had been well spent, that would have flown out to better salaries and economic growth. So there's that second dynamic behind the question of economic crimes that needs to be given a lot more time. What's the opportunity cost of diverting resources through theft or whatever other means in terms of economic gain foregone?
Yes.
Yes.
Ken, what do you say?
There was a report that came out about 1 year ago that suggested almost 60% of young people were okay with taking or receiving bribes. So for me, I found that report to be in conflict with the outcomes of this report. Maybe the sample base was different. This one was probably more corporate executives. That one was young people. But when I talk to most people on the ground, there's a sense that there is some sort of like moral regression, both in the public and private sector. And if we don't check that, I know the president has launched a huge war on corruption, but if that's not sustained, sometimes I fear that we might lose the benefits of what the free economy can give us.
All right. So, of course, austerity measures and so many other things that have been discussed with regards to that and curbing that inclination to actually go towards that bribe as well. But, gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's how we do wrap